Hi guys, so when we want the best advice on something, we usually go to the experts. We take on board what they have to say and use the information to make the best informed decisions. Well, that's the opposite of what happened when it came to Brexit, and it seems to be the opposite of what's happening when it comes to the pandemic. Here, Brexit Hardman Steve Baker seems to know more than the experts, again, this time when it comes to public health. Here he is answering questions from Channel 4 on new restrictions to deal with the latest variant.
Mr Baker, why are you opposed to the new restrictions, the Plan B restrictions?
Well, absolutely essential now that we create the kind of society that's worth living in. I'm determined that that does not mean living under minute and frequently changing rules, and that's why I'll be voting against extending mask mandates, I'll be voting against vaccine passports, and I'll be voting against mandatory vaccination as a condition of employment in the NHS.
But are you not worried about the data from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine saying that we could see tens of thousands of deaths if we don't have these restrictions?
Well, let's be really clear what they've published. They've published modelling, and I've had a lot to say about the models. Unfortunately, they're very often based on assumptions which are wrong and pessimistic.
So we have the expert here. The expert has looked at the information available and said, look, they're wrong and pessimistic. Well, let's look at his scientific background. This is Steve Baker's Wikipedia page, and you can see here he has a degree in aerospace engineering. Okay, so this is the guy who has decided, I'm not going to follow what the scientists are saying. I've made up my own mind. Now, he also talked about mask mandates. He's against that. So this is basically asking people to wear masks in crowded areas. He's against that. And he's also against vaccines for NHS staff. But many NHS staff, I think all NHS staff on the front line, have to be vaccinated for other reasons. So why is he just against this one?
And if people go to the Spectator's Data website, they can see very clearly that these models, time and again, are far, far too pessimistic and wrong.
The Spectator is his source. So he's ignoring the science, and he's going to the Spectator. The Spectator, which is basically an upper class version of the Daily Mail. Who gives a crap what the Spectator has to say? This is insane. But then this is Brexit Hardman Steve Baker, who ignored the experts when it came to the decision to leave the European Union. How well is that going?
But the costs on people's lives are very, very real.
The costs on people's lives, I'm sorry to be interrupting every few seconds, but the costs on everyone's lives is very, very real. This is the guy who also voted against increasing welfare in line with prices. This is the guy who's voted against welfare benefits, increased welfare benefits for people who are sick or unable to work. This is a guy who's completely against any sort of welfare generally. But he cares about people's lives, yes, really.
What's your concern? Is that Plan B is only the start? There could be future lockdowns?
Well, we're already seeing that rumour, and this happens time and again. We get drawn into these things bit by bit with shifting goalposts.
They're not shifting goalposts. If your government doesn't deal with the crisis correctly, and we've seen it with Boris Johnson, Sage and the scientists tell him you need to impose a lockdown. Boris Johnson ignores that until the very last minute, until it's too late, and then he imposes a lockdown. It doesn't deal with the crisis correctly. He comes out of the lockdown too early, and you start to see a spread increase again. Then he has to impose another lockdown, once again late, and is always afraid to piss off people like Steve Baker, the new ERG. People need to stop listening to politicians, and they need to start listening to scientists. The scientists have said on every occasion, you need to do X. And the politicians instead say, we're not going to do X, we're going to do something else. Oh, look, it didn't work. Let's blame the scientists.
And that just won't do for the British people.
Steve Baker should be nowhere near the House of Commons. And unfortunately, I think he's using this issue to empower himself. I've said this before. He wants to create a power base within the Conservative Party, where when the Prime Minister wants to do something, they have to consult him. It's not so much, I don't think he cares about the pandemic. I don't think he cares about any of these restrictions deep down. This is about power. This is about stamping his authority within the Conservative Party. Now, maybe he wants to become a minister someday. Maybe he wants to become Prime Minister someday. And he's using this as a platform. The same with Brexit. I don't think Steve Baker gives a crap about Brexit. But he knew it was something that he could use to make himself famous. Because imagine for a moment, you take away this pandemic, you take away Brexit. Who the hell is Steve Baker? Apart from people within his constituency, I'm pretty sure nobody ever heard of him. But when Brexit came along and the pandemic came along, he used it as a springboard. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.